GamingBolt presents 9 times Sony shamelessly ripped off Nintendo. Modern console gaming owes a lot to Nintendo, and it goes without saying that much of what we see in today's hardware and even software has its roots in things that were pioneered and or perfected by the Japanese behemoth. Iteration evolution is, of course, very important in this industry, or really any industry for that matter, but Sony in particular have almost had a habit over the years of borrowing many of the big N's ideas. Not to cast aspirations on the huge success Sony has achieved with a lot of what it's done, but this is a pattern that has been noticed by countless people for over 2 decades. In a lot of these cases, Sony, to their credit, actually improved heavily upon what they were copying, but well, copy they did. In this feature, we're going to take a look at 9 times when Sony was, let's say, heavily inspired by stuff Nintendo has already done. PlayStation Classic. Let's kick things off with the most recent example. While Microsoft has been making strides with backwards compatibility, the other leaders in the hardware market have instead chosen to release classic versions of older consoles. Nintendo kicked off this trend with the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, mini, portable-sized versions of the pieces of hardware that came pre-installed with a library of some of their best games. Quite recently, Sony announced its own take on the concept. Instead, it wasn't really their own take. From the name to the general core ideas to even the images that were used to promote its announcement, the PlayStation Classic is a hilariously obvious replica of what Nintendo has been doing for a few years now. The PS1 controller. Nintendo had cemented a pretty robust, accessible, and effective way of making console controllers with the NES, which they expanded upon even further with the SNES, with 4 face buttons on the right side of the controller, direction buttons on the left, start and select buttons in the middle, and shoulder buttons on, well, the shoulders. Sony took that idea, added a second pair of shoulder buttons, 2 grips at the edges of the gamepad, and called it a day. This isn't to say that Nintendo has exclusive ownership over the idea of things like face buttons or shoulder buttons, suggesting that would be ridiculous, but even at first glance, it becomes instantly apparent that the original PlayStation controller was borrowing liberally from the SNES gamepad. However, it should be noted that it sort of makes sense since the PlayStation originally started out as a Nintendo accessory. Analog sticks. Joysticks have been around for as long as anyone can remember, but Nintendo took that concept and expertly implemented it into the N64 as a single analog stick, which was something that allowed for greater control and movement than ever before, while also truly unleashing the developers in their attempts to make strides in the 3D space of video games. Originally, the PS1's controller launched without analog sticks, but Sony took a look at the N64's success and went, hey, let's do that, but more. And thus the DualShock was born, with its 2 analog stick design that has now become iconic. While the idea of having analog sticks in a controller seems like a staple now, which it is, considering the fact that the PS1 controller originally did not have them and added them later on as an afterthought to chase the effectiveness of Nintendo's own analog stick, goes to show that Sony were obviously influenced quite heavily by their biggest rival. Rumble. Rumble or vibration is something else that is so common in today's day and age. We don't even think about it, except when Sony doesn't include it in its 6-axis, at which point we're all up in arms. But back during the N64 PS1 days, the technology was fairly new in video games. Sure, there had been haptic feedback in pinball machines and other such stuff, but with the N64's Rumble Pack add-on, Nintendo implemented that in the N64's console as well. Obviously, it was a great success, so obviously, Sony wanted a piece of that action as well. When the DualShock rolled around, not only did it have analog sticks, it also had rumble feedback, at least for the games that would support it. PlayStation AllStars Battle Royale. Super Smash Bros. Is a celebration of all things Nintendo, and more in recent years, a celebration of all things in the industry. And the crossover fighting game franchise has achieved great success over the years. In the PlayStation 3 era, Sony decided that they wanted a little sliver of that pie for themselves. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale brought together a number of well-known Sony characters, from Parappa the Rapper and Sackboy, while also pulling in a few third-party giants from franchises such as Metal Gear Solid. To be fair, it was a pretty enjoyable experience, but a lack of meaningful content, balancing issues with how to win a match, and other smaller problems came together to amount to a game that couldn't stand as tall as the series it borrowed so liberally from. Invisimals. The Pokemon craze is something that transcends the games industry, with the franchise having become unbelievably huge in almost all forms of media ever since it was first created over 2 decades ago. Naturally, many developers and publishers have tried to ape its success, and Sony tried their hands at that as well, starting with Invisimals on the PSP. To be fair, it wasn't a straight ripoff. With unique and novel features like augmented reality, it tried new things to set itself apart from the crowd. But the core concept of capturing monsters and having them grow by battling against each other was by no means original. PlayStation Move. Out of all of the entries on this list, perhaps with the exception of the PlayStation Classic, this has to be the most shameless copy-paste job Sony has ever done on something that was originally done by the Big N. With the advent of the Wii, motion control gaming saw a massive explosion in popularity, taking over the industry like few other things have, and naturally others saw the success as a nice business opportunity. Microsoft put a unique spin on it by having full-body motion controls with a Kinect, but Sony figured, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The PS Move is almost a one-to-one replica of the Wii Remote, with a wand to waggle around held in one hand, and another stick with buttons and an analog stick in the other hand. Sure, the glowing ball thingy on top of the wand provides some bit of novelty, but at the end of the day, put a hat on a rabbit, it's still a rabbit. ModNation Racers. Kart racers are by no means the exclusive domain of Nintendo, but with a flurry of awesome Mario Kart titles over the years, Nintendo have truly made the genre their own. There have been a lot of great kart racers for sure, with Sony's own Crash Team Racing being one of the non-Nintendo highlights of the genre. But for the most part, Nintendo's been in the lead with kart racers while others have been trying to play catch-up. 2010's ModNation Racers was another one of Sony's cracks at the kart racing genre, combining core concepts of the genre with the play, create, share mechanics of their own Little Big Planet. And admittedly, it was a very good game, while the added novelty of full-fledged story-driven campaign also elevated the entire experience. In the end, though, it failed to have the kind of impact that Mario Kart does with each of its entries. Tamako Toys. Amiibos are nobody's favorite thing, but their popularity is undeniable. The line of toys made by Nintendo came out of nowhere and have been a huge source of income for the company ever since. Sony's own line of toys, called Tamako Figures, are their own attempt at cashing in on that craze as well. The figures for everybody from Bloodborne's Hunter to Crash Bandicoot to Parappa the Rapper are well made, so as collectibles they're pretty good purchases, and they don't even cost that much. But unlike Amiibos, they're just toys and have no NFC functionality. To be fair, Amiibos aren't exactly an original idea either, and are basically lifted from Skylanders, but let's just conveniently forget about that part for now, shall we? And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.